Millions of Americans keep seeing the same attention-grabbing claim and asking the same thing. Is this a real policy path, or just a message built to sound reassuring when money feels tight? The idea being floated is that Donald Trump could send out $2,000 checks to Americans without Congress. No votes, no lawmakers, just checks going straight to households. For retirees, seniors on fixed incomes, and anyone watching prices climb month after month, even the possibility of extra money can feel like oxygen. It changes how closely people listen, how they plan, and sometimes how they spend. That's exactly why it's important to slow the story down and look at what's legally possible, what's financially realistic, and what parts of the headline leave out the most important details. The claim spreads fast because it feels simple. Tariffs bring in revenue. That revenue gets returned to the public. People receive checks. It sounds like a straightforward loop, money in, money out. But the federal government is not a personal bank account that one person can access with a signature. The system is intentionally built to make spending power slow, limited, and shared, because the founders feared what could happen if a single leader could move massive public funds whenever it suited the moment. That guardrail is not a technicality. It's one of the core safety features of the entire structure of government. The part most headlines skip is that the question didn't appear out of nowhere. A reporter asked about the concept of tariff rebate checks, and the question referenced comments from within Trump's own economic orbit. One of his top economic advisors had already acknowledged that Congress would need to approve any such payments. That detail matters because it shows this is not simply outside critics nitpicking. It's the basic reality of how federal money works, even according to people who support the broader agenda. The real issue is not whether a check sounds helpful. The real issue is who actually has the authority to create it, fund it, and distribute it. Trump's answer is what made the story explode. He spoke with confidence and suggested Congress might not need to be involved. He pointed to tariff revenue and described the idea as returning money to the American people, sometimes framed like a dividend. He also mentioned the possibility of setting income limits, and even suggested the same general pool of money could potentially be used in multiple ways, including addressing debt. The delivery makes it sound organized and almost already engineered, but confident delivery does not create legal authority. When you separate tone from substance, you're left with a hard question. Can a president actually do this unilaterally? In the United States, the president does not control the nation's checkbook. Congress does. That's not a partisan statement. It's constitutional design. Federal revenue comes in through many streams, including taxes and tariffs, and then it goes to the Treasury. Once it's there, spending it requires authorization. Collecting money and spending money are different powers. The executive branch can enforce laws and administer programs, but it cannot simply decide to redistribute hundreds of billions of dollars because it believes it would be popular or helpful. Appropriations are the mechanism Congress uses to direct spending, and without appropriations, agencies do not have the legal permission to send money out on a massive scale. Some people assume tariffs create a separate pot of money, like a labeled bucket that can be tipped back toward households. That's not how it works in practice. Tariff revenue becomes federal revenue. It merges into the broader flow of government funds. You do not get a special shortcut simply because the money came from one specific source. If a new payment program is created, Congress must define the program, decide who qualifies, decide how much goes out, and decide how the program will be funded. That's the process, whether the goal is popular or controversial. This is why the quiet correction from policy advisors is so important. Kevin Hassett, who has been described as a top economic advisor in Trump's circle, emphasized that Congress would have to approve any payments to households. That statement doesn't even reject the idea outright. It simply places it back inside the system that must exist for it to be real. No matter how the money is collected, distribution at that scale requires legislation. It requires formal authorization. It requires the government's spending machinery to be turned on in a way that is lawful, auditable, and accountable. Even if someone tries to argue that emergency powers could be used, emergency powers do not erase the appropriations requirement for giant new nationwide payment programs. Courts have repeatedly reinforced that the power of the purse belongs to Congress. If any administration tried to move enormous sums without congressional authorization, lawsuits would arrive immediately. The legal fight would begin almost instantly, and the distribution would likely be paused or blocked long before most people saw a deposit. The system is designed to respond that way specifically to prevent unilateral spending decisions. Then there is the second barrier that is even harder to argue with than legal structure, the math. Supporters of the concept often point to tariff revenue and say the numbers could be large enough to fund major rebates. Tariffs can raise substantial revenue, and under certain assumptions, analysts have discussed figures in the hundreds of billions over a year. That sounds enormous in isolation, which is why it can make the proposal feel self-funding. But the cost of sending $2,000 to a broad slice of households is also enormous, and depending on eligibility rules, it can quickly move beyond what tariff revenue realistically covers. Once the revenue is not enough, the story quietly transforms. It stops being returning tariff money and starts becoming finding money from somewhere else. And in the federal government, when you want to spend more than you bring in, the usual answer is borrowing. Borrowing is not mysterious, and it is not a moral lecture. It is a basic accounting reality. If a program costs more than the revenue dedicated to it, and there is no offsetting spending cut elsewhere, the difference is made up through additional debt. That's where the conversation becomes especially important for seniors and retirees. Borrowing to fund large direct payments can increase economic pressure in ways that do not show up immediately on the day a check arrives. More debt can contribute to higher interest costs for the government. It can affect expectations in financial markets. And when money enters the economy without a matching increase in goods and services, it can add to inflationary pressure. Inflation is not just a headline. It's a slow leak in purchasing power, and it hits fixed-income households the hardest. Working-age households sometimes have at least a chance to respond to inflation through higher wages, job changes, or additional hours. Retirees usually do not. Social Security adjustments can help, but they often lag real-world price increases, and they do not cover everyone's exact costs evenly. Many seniors spend a larger share of their budget on healthcare, prescriptions, utilities, and housing. Those categories can rise faster than the average inflation number people see on the news. So even if a one-time payment feels helpful in the short term, the longer-term consequences of inflation can quietly claw that help back through higher everyday costs. This is why a promise that sounds like relief can also be financially dangerous if people treat it as guaranteed. When money is tight, hope can start to feel like a plan. People may delay necessary decisions, postpone building an emergency cushion, or take on risk assuming extra cash is right around the corner. But unless a proposal becomes law, it is not real money. It is not scheduled. It is not funded. It is not authorized. Treating political talk like a confirmed deposit can lead to choices that are difficult to reverse later. It also matters that direct payment ideas are emotionally powerful and politically effective, even when they are not practically ready. A check is simple. People understand it instantly. It doesn't require learning budget procedures, reading legislative language, or tracking committee hearings. It creates a clear image. Help is coming. That's why variations of this story keep resurfacing, especially when inflation is painful or when elections are near. Repetition makes the idea feel familiar, and familiar can start to feel like likely. But repetition does not create a legal pathway, close a funding gap, or override the constitutional separation of powers. If $2,000 checks were ever going to happen in a real way, the process would look very different from a confident soundbite. There would be legislation introduced in Congress that clearly spells out eligibility rules and payment amounts. There would be debate over who qualifies and how to prevent fraud. There would be arguments about whether the payments should go to all households, only lower income households, only certain taxpayers, or only people under specific hardship conditions. Most importantly, there would be explicit funding language, because Congress would have to decide where the money comes from and how to handle any shortfall. Then there would be votes in both chambers. Only after that would implementation begin through the Treasury and relevant agencies. And implementation itself can take time because systems must be built, data must be verified, and distribution must be coordinated. Right now, the most important point is simple. Without legislation, there are no checks to plan around. No matter how persuasive the headline feels, the legal structure does not allow a president to simply bypass Congress and mail out nationwide payments at that scale. The difference between a proposal and a program is congressional authorization. The difference between talk and reality is a bill, a vote, and an appropriation. So the safest way to follow this story is to watch the boring signals, not the exciting ones. Watch for actual bills, not clips. Watch for votes, not confident phrases. Watch for funding language that explains how payments would be paid for. Until those steps happen, any claim about checks should be treated as speculation or messaging, not a guarantee. If you're living on a fixed income, this clarity is protective. It keeps your planning grounded in what you can control rather than what might be promised. It helps prevent risky decisions based on money that is not approved. And it encourages a healthier mindset. Treat political claims like weather forecasts, not bank statements. You can pay attention, you can prepare for possibilities, but you do not reorganize your entire budget based on something that has not become law. It's understandable why people want this to be true. When prices rise and budgets feel squeezed, direct relief feels like the simplest answer. But the system is designed to make spending power shared, slow, and accountable. That design is frustrating in the moment, but it exists to protect the public from unilateral decisions involving massive sums of taxpayer money. The most helpful thing you can do is separate what sounds good from what is actually possible and base financial decisions on what is confirmed, not what is repeated. Facts may feel less exciting than headlines, but they are what keep you steady when money matters most.